It's the Real Faith for Real Life podcast. Hey, everybody. Today we're answering your toughest questions about God, the Bible, and faith. But first, because faith impacts every area of life, let's check in with the headlines. All right, with us today, not only Pastor Eric, but also JP, who we introduced last week, our new worship director. Hey, JP.
Hi.
Good to have three on for the first time. Looking forward to some good discussions. All right, so for the headlines today, I have a very fun one. This is titled, "That's Not a Dog?" ? So a family in China raised what it believed to be a 250-pound dog for 2 years before learning it was actually an endangered species of bear. Sun Yun, she discovered it was she thought it was a Tibetan Mastiff, but when it started standing up on two legs and eating 2 buckets of noodles every day, she finally came to realize, oh, I'm raising a bear. What do you make of this, guys? I know we're all dog people around the table today.
I totally thought that it was going to go, she realized it wasn't a dog when it ate her toddler. So I'm very happy with the way that story ended.
I still have questions about why they're feeding this dog noodles, though. Is that a normal food to feed dogs overseas? Like, I guess I don't know that.
It seems weird to me, too.
Yeah.
But yeah, the story does have a happy ending. They got it to a wildlife rescue center after they reached out to the authorities for help. And, this is not the first time this has happened in China. Not long ago, a man was found to be raising a bear when he initially believed it to be a stray dog, which he kept in a cage. I will say this. I used to have a golden retriever, and we named him Marley. But when we adopted him, his birth family had titled him Bear because he looked so much like a bear. So my golden retriever weighed 120 pounds and looked like a big red bear.
Yeah.
When it would get loose in the neighborhood, because it would dig under the fence, the neighbors would call, say, "There's a bear in my backyard."
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I get this story. I get it.
I just have to say this, though. Like, wouldn't it be totally obvious that when the Amazon truck drives up, your dog is not barking, but rather like growling like a bear and sending the Amazon driver running? Like, wouldn't you get the hint at that point? I mean, maybe not.
All right. Before we move on, let's compare dogs here. So, Eric, tell us about your dog.
80-pound Labrador, more hair than dog.
And JP, Pepper's been around the office.
She has. She is a 25-pound Cairn Terrier, like Toto from The Wizard of Oz.
Cool.
And would not be mistaken for a bear in any context. So
Very true. All right, second story for today. Inflation is a terrible thing, right? And we're all struggling to figure out how to stay ahead of it. There's barely an investment you can make that will pay better than the rate of inflation. You have to get real lucky or something. So I've got you an idea here.
Okay.
The title is VHS Investment. So if you happen to have VHS copies in your basement of some classic films like Back to the Future, The Fast and the Furious, Teen Wolf, or Gremlins, guess what? They're going for $1,000, $2,000, even $7,000 now.
No way.
Yeah, way. Yeah, way. So yeah, it's true that $3 million worth of VHS tapes are being sold each year online on auction sites. That's crazy, huh?
Who's buying these?
Yeah.
Why? And why? Like, I just don't get it.
That's a great question. I don't know if I get it either. I understand records have that kind of vintage analog warmth, but VHS tapes aren't warm. They're just kind of like warbly and staticky and finicky. I hated VHS tapes.
Yeah, be kind, rewind, gentlemen.
Yeah.
You have to rewind. Otherwise, you're the bad guy.
Right. My in-laws actually it was a Corvette that would open up, like a little toy Corvette that would open up. You would put the VHS tape in, and it would automatically rewind it for you. So I don't think you can find those. Well, maybe you can. Maybe there is a huge market for those.
$3 million.
It's worth a lot of money now.
Yeah. You know what's frustrating to me is my family is sort of like pack rats. No offense, Mom, if you're listening. Hi, Mom. But they save everything until the day before it gets valuable.
Oh, yeah.
So my dad had exactly what this story is talking about. Just stacks of VHS things, and we held on to those things and held on. And I think, when Mom downsized into a smaller place, they're all gone now.
Yeah.
That could have been my retirement, y'all.
VHS tapes.
Who knew?
Yeah.
Well, coming up, we've got questions from you about God, the faith, and the Bible. We're going to answer them. So let's get into it. All right. I'm glad we got 3 minds around the table today because we've got some good questions. Over the course of this season, we're going to answer all different kinds of questions, but I'm going to start today with some really just honest questions. And I think all of these 3, come from a teenager in our church, and I love them because they're just really honest questions about some basic parts of trying to honor God with your life. And I'm sure our listeners have very similar questions, if not the same questions. So, number 1 for today, what does the Bible say about swear words, and how do we use our words to honor God? I do have a bleep ready if we need to, if you need to go for it.
Just to drop a bleep in there.
Yeah, you ready? Let's try it. Whoa, Eric, tone it down, man. Just kidding.
Yeah, okay.
Well, what do we think? What do we think about swear words here?
Yeah, I think that the Bible has a lot to say about that. I'm thinking specifically about James and kind of this picture of your tongue being a rudder. And, although some of the words that we hear people say that have been kind of labeled as dirty words might not be listed as dirty words in the Bible, they still really serve as a direction for where we're going to be traveling in our lives and how we speak. So I could say one thing or another thing. If the first thing I'm going to say is kind and filled with positive energy, likely that's kind of the path that is going to steer my day. But if I'm going to walk into the day all negative and swearing and cussing, it's going to point me in a direction that is not so good. And if I'm thinking about that as well too, one of the biggest things that I want to be pursuing is a life following Christ. And so wherever my tongue is pointing me, that's the way I want it to go. And likely it's not usually filled with expletives and other things.
Yeah. And what do you think, JP? You got a potty mouth or? I'm just trying to keep it light. Here.
Probably more so than I should.
It's got real.
Yeah, it just got real. No, I think, and having lived in a different culture where we stumbled upon bad words, it's, I don't know. Words are essentially just a series of syllables that don't really have meaning in and of themselves until you attach meaning to them. And so I guess at a very technical level, are swear words in and of themselves wrong or bad? I would say no. It all has to do with the signification the meaning you attach to them. A lot of times it's culturally derived. It was interesting. My in-laws, my mother-in-law in particular, would use the S word pretty regularly because she just grew up on a farm, like literally grew up on a farm. That's not meant to be an insult. And that was how they talked about it. And so for her, it didn't have that same cultural attachment that we may have with it today. So in that sense, I would say at the end of the day, a word is just a word. It really depends on the attitude and kind of mentality behind the way you use it, which is why a lot of times I think swapping out swear words for non-swear words, like if you say dang, for example, or I had friends in high school who would yell instead of taking the Lord's name in vain. I don't think that's actually doing much because at the end of the day, you still have the same attitude, the same things going on in your heart, which probably aren't pleasing to the Lord. Yeah. And simply swapping out one word for another to avoid checking the bad word box, I don't think is actually satisfying any like spiritual maturity requirements.
Yeah. And just so you know, I am going to bleep out what you just said because that was highly offensive.
Yeah.
Well, he just said it's a swap. It's swapping out for.
Oh, yeah.
So in his heart.
So you're going to have to bleep what we just said then, too.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of post-production work.
Oh, boy.
Anyway, I think, similar to what JP said, you don't find a list of prohibited words that are inherently bad in the Bible anywhere. But I was raised with this real sensitivity toward those certain words. And people would often refer to like Ephesians 4:29, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths. And so we would tend to define unwholesome talk by here's your list of words. Here's the 7 words you're never allowed to say. But if you look at the context, it's really instructive in the opposite, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And if you even rewind a little bit further, Paul starts talking about putting off falsehood and talking truthfully to your neighbor, for we're all members of one body. And so anyway, it's in the context of relationships. And the real question we should be asking is what I'm saying building people up or tearing them down? Is it encouraging them, or is it doing the opposite? So I think that's kind of the core meaning here. But still, even with that said, there's such a thing as being sensitive. And there's this weak Christian and strong Christian kind of thing. And I'm strong, and I know this word really is just a word. But if I offend somebody, we'll call them the weaker person just for sake of using biblical terms here. If I know my language is going to offend somebody, then I should not use that language and create an unnecessary stumbling block to the conversation. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's going to come down to, because you have kind of the public interaction with somebody, where you can appeal to, only being edifying to the other person. But I think for me, a lot, again, just being real, may have to cut some of this out. It's it's more about your own mental attitude towards things. And if somebody cuts me off in traffic, not cussing at them, but the surprise of it, or you stub your toe and nobody else is around, where you're not necessarily just trying to take into account the other person's conscience and is this going to build them up or edify them, but it's just me. I think then it probably comes down to matters of conscience, where you should probably just talk to the Lord about it. And I forget if it's the 1 Corinthians version of eating meat or the Romans version of eating meat. Paul ends up saying, whatever you do, in this context, eating meat sacrificed to idols, whether you eat or whether you abstain, do it all to the glory of God. I think you actually just preached on this, but bring it up with the Lord. God loves you. He cares about you, and he'll give you an answer or help you walk down a path that's best for you. So,
wow, that's fantastic. Which is a great bridge into our next question, which gets at the exact scenario you're talking about. So you're stuck in traffic, you're facing things in life that you do not want to be facing. The question is, how do we express our anger, concerns, and doubts to people and to God while remaining meek and gentle? So I think the heart behind this question is maybe the person's wrestling with verses like this, Psalm 4:4, be angry and do not sin. So it's not necessarily a sin to be angry. You find that in the New Testament as well. In Ephesians chapter 4, Paul says, therefore each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we're all members of one body. Hey, I just read that for the last question. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on you while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. So it is possible, according to the Bible, to be angry and not sin. So the question is, how do you do that? How do you express when you're angry with someone or with God in an honoring way, meekly and gently?
That's a really good question, a very hard and difficult question to answer is what I would say. Just as a form of reference here, the whole book of Psalms is very much worship and conversation with God, in which the psalmist writes about things that are positive and celebratory, and also about things that just really, really stink and how bad life is going. And that just serves as an important picture for us as followers of Christ, that we can come before the Lord and put our whole heart before him. We can share our anger with him. We can share our sadness. We can share our joy and our celebration with him. And in all of that, God looks at us as his son and his daughter and says, that is my son and daughter. I love them. And so for this question, maybe it's going a couple of different ways, but I would want to tell this person, whoever this is, that you don't have to hide who you are before the Lord, because the Lord, number one, knows who you are, but number two, just wants to be in a deep relationship with you. Not some surface level one where he only gets 10% of the top of the iceberg, but where you show all of yourself to him and you allow him to form all of you into who he's created you to be.
Yeah. Maybe one of the Psalms you're referencing is Psalm 3. Where the psalmist writes, Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. But then the psalmist always turns a corner in these psalms of lament. He says, but you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head high. And more times in this same psalm, it goes back and forth between, here's the reality I'm facing. I don't like it, but God, I trust you. And maybe that's part of the equation to expressing your anger in an honoring way. What do you think, JP?
I'd broaden it out to beyond anger, because I think there's a lot we probably deal with that this would be helpful for. Sadness would be included, or even positive emotions, happiness and excitement and things like that. And I like to pretend that there is a little 2-year-old in the car next to me saying, why? So when you get mad because somebody cuts you off, just go, why did I just get angry? And keep asking the why question until you can't ask why anymore. And I think when you actually ask that question and give real answers to that, you, one, learn a lot about yourself, but you also learn a lot about kind of where the anger is coming from. Are you angry because maybe you didn't plan well enough and leave early enough, and now somebody cutting you off, or, getting caught in a traffic jam like me this morning is making you angry because now you're late, but it's really your fault because you didn't plan ahead enough? Are you getting angry because you're seeing the consequences of sin around you, and it's this general kind of frustration with the fact that the world has been plunged into, chaos because of what Adam and Eve had done in the garden, which seems to maybe have a little bit more of a righteous tone to it. But even, the positive emotions, why are you happy about something? Because that can be for good or for bad reasons. And I think a lot of people try and separate faith from emotions and say that emotions aren't a very helpful guide. I push back on that and say I think they're actually an incredibly helpful guide, because they may not be pushing you in the right direction, but they will allow you to get back to the root of what's going on. And so I heard somebody talk about 2 words, consolation and desolation. To kind of go back to the anger thing, consolation is this idea that in whatever you're going through, you feel connected to God, you feel like he's present, and you feel like you're on the same page. And so if you're angry about things that you should rightly be angry or upset about, then that's consolation. I think that's something to embrace. But if you find yourself getting angry and you ask the why questions and you realize, oh, this is because I'm dealing with selfishness, or this is because I'm terrible at planning and don't really care about improving that part of my life, then you would call that desolation, because that's separation from God, and God is not necessarily with you in that. But again, like, anger is just one of many emotions. I think we really should be paying attention to all of them and asking those why questions to hopefully get back to what's really going on in my heart right now.
Yeah, I love the why exercise that you're describing. First of all, we see Jesus with anger. I mean, he's overturning tables in the temple because people are not living in the way that God had originally intended that space to be, or for their lives to be. And so anger in itself is not bad, but we have to look at that why question and recognize what it is. What you're talking about is like emotional formation. A lot of times at church, we talk about spiritual formation, but there's other types of formation: emotional formation, sexual formation in the way of Christ, all of these different things. And so as we look at your emotional formation in the way of Christ, we should be modeling Christ. And as we ask that why question, why, it brings us to a place of really digging down into our hearts and saying, okay, really, what's the root of this? What's going on inside of me that's causing me to do this or act this way?
Yeah, I love that there's a what question as well as a why question you alluded to. Like, what makes you angry? And is it the same thing that makes God angry? As people formed in God's image, anger is part of us. But are we angry at the right things or the wrong things? And I was just reading this article that talked about the difference between lament and grumbling. So grumbling in the Bible is universally just condemned, and it leads nowhere good. But lament is supposed to be a part of the Christian life with God. And even recently, in walking through some very difficult things with our people here at this church, I've been reminded that we need to do more lament as part of our public worship service, as part of our counseling with people, that they should be able to take their experiences and bring it to God. And that's lament, whereas grumbling is the opposite. It's kind of this entitled, like, I deserve something better, and condemning God. So, I don't know. Great discussion, guys. Thank you so much for helping us process that God wants to be part of every part of our lives. That's really cool. There's another question that flows right out of this one. So let's dive into that one. It's about mental illness. And I love this question because it's so real. And so many people listening deal with this. So talking about emotions and experiences and difficulties, what does the Bible say about mental health and about suicide? So the very first thing, just as a little disclaimer, if you're listening and you are experiencing suicidal thoughts, then immediately get help. Like, hey, stop the podcast here and talk to your parents, talk to your pastor, talk to a doctor, a teacher, or call 1-800-SUICIDE or 1-800-273-TALK. With that being said, I studied counseling at a bachelor's and master's level, so I definitely have some thoughts about this, some really deep, thought a lot about this, as someone who's been on both sides of the counseling chair, and really passionate about getting people the help they need so people don't suffer in silence, which is all too often the case with folks. So before I get into it, what do you all think? What does the Bible say about mental illness and suicide?
I would probably take more of my answer will be more kind of an overview, I guess. When God created humanity, it's not like he created humanity with a spirit or a soul and was like, this is the really important part, but I guess I have to give him the rest of this too. I always make the joke with emotions that, it wasn't like God was creating humanity and he goes, hey, Jesus, come here, check this out. I'm going to give them emotions and they're not going to have a clue what to do with them. But like all of who we are is meant to interact with God. And that being said, I think you can look at physical health, you can look at mental health or emotional health, and you can look at spiritual health as three domains that are distinct but have significant overlap. And so I think when it comes to suicide, a lot of times we just think mental illness or something a psychologist or counselor should help with. But I think there can also be, and there often are, physical reasons, chemical imbalances in the body, trauma that people have gone through, which then leak into the kind of psychological domain. But I also think that there is clearly throughout the Bible spiritual warfare or spiritual influence, if you want to call it that can lead to depression, anxiety, and potentially suicidal thoughts. So my heart, I guess, would just be to remind us all of those kind of three domains. You can look at spiritual health, mental health, and physical health, and just say they're all in play when we talk about this.
I think what I'm hearing you say, JP, is really important, is that if somebody is feeling this way, number one, they're not alone, all right? I think that's part of the tool of the enemy is isolation. And so that when somebody does feel this thought of like, man, nobody's like me, nobody likes me, I just want this to end, the enemy uses that as a way of isolating them from other people because nobody's like them. That's so not true. Right. That's so not true. We're all experiencing emotions. We're all experiencing this thing called life, and it's hard. Yeah. It's hard. I mean, it's hard for us also as pastors in this church, isn't it? I mean, like, we know that each and every day is a battle, a cosmic battle, a spiritual battle that we are in against the enemy, in which we all try to journey forward as followers of Christ. I just want to read this passage too from Jonah 2. I know this is a little bit of a historical passage, but Jonah has not done what God expected him to do, and he's thrown over the side of the boat. And he writes this poem or prayer that describes his current situation. And it might, I think that this just might paint a picture of what many people feel when they are lonely and experiencing suicidal thoughts. It says this: "Water encompassed me to the point of death. The great deep engulfed me. Weeds were trapped around my head. I descended to the roots of the mountains. The earth with its bars was all around me. But you have brought me up my life. You have brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. While I was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you into your holy temple." A picture of just this sense of loss and no way out, but that the way out was when he viewed and saw the Lord, when he remembered the Lord. And I think that that's important as we start to think about our pathways through navigating mental health and suicide, is not that it's just going to be, I'm going to take this medicine and it's going to fix me forever, but that I'm going to meet the Lord on this journey, and he's going to be a part of that healing process too.
Yeah. Yeah. Great insights, guys. I, in my study and in my experience with mental health, I relate a lot to the different domains that JP talked about and how they're all related and interrelated, right? So, let's just take the physiology of the human body, for instance. If I'm not healthy, then it's harder for me to feel good, which impacts the way I think, which impacts my emotions, which impacts even my social relationships, which is another domain we should consider. If you're lonely, that's not good either. So all of these areas are interconnected. For me right now, I've got a little extra weight on. Maybe you can tell. Maybe it's maybe the camera is slimming, but often not. And I don't wake up like I used to anymore. I don't wake up full of energy. I'm carrying around some extra weight, which is a lot of work. And my diet is full of inflammatory things. It's not great for you. Maybe you don't sleep enough. Maybe you don't drink enough water. All of these very simple things can contribute to you not feeling well physically, which starts a downward spiral and starts to bring down your mental health, your spiritual health, every other part of your life. And we have to consider how Jesus works through all of these areas. I believe that Jesus works through doctors who prescribe penicillin to fix strep throat. And I believe Jesus works through my doctor who did some tests and said, "Bill, you're deficient in magnesium and you're deficient in B12 and you need to try other things." And in balancing that out, God has helped me a lot. So with that multidisciplinary approach, if you're suffering, I would urge you to seek out professional help. That's a scary word, but it's just somebody who's on your side to help you evaluate all those different areas of life. And, a pastor can help you with the spiritual part, and a doctor can help you with the physical part, and just a team of people to help you out. No matter what, though, really, here's the real deal, especially with regard to prescriptions. So some people really do have a chemical imbalance or other things going on, and you're stuck in that downward spiral. And to get out of that, you might need that manual override to get your serotonin level up, your dopamine level up, whatever is out of balance, epinephrine, norepinephrine. And once you have that help, then you have that bandwidth to begin fixing things in the way you think and fixing things in your spiritual life. That medicine helps you get the bandwidth to do the hard things that you may not have been able to do otherwise. And then maybe you're able to get off the medicine and maybe not. And as a pastor, I would just encourage everybody not to suffer, but to realize that Jesus does work through all sorts of different ways to bring healing. But ultimately, I love 1 Peter 5:7, "Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you." In Matthew 11, where Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." And so all of these things we're talking about, sleep and water and nutrition and whatever. It's really the way to get you the bandwidth you need to have focus and clarity, that Jesus is the one who can bring you rest and peace. Well, that's a very good set of questions to get this series rolling. We got 3 more for next week, so I hope you'll tune in. And want to encourage you to submit your own questions if you've got questions about God, the faith, or the Bible. And hey, maybe we'll answer them on a show. So take care, everybody, and we'll see you soon.